Sometime during our earliest days on Earth, human beings began looking up at the heavens, at the world around them, and at each other. Soon, they began asking questions about what they saw.
Every normal human being is a natural-born philosopher. We come into this world wondering about everything. Philosophy is about getting your bearings in the world. It's about map-making for the human adventure.
What's of value in life? Is it bad to be selfish? There's no way to answer those questions except think and argue, and that's what philosophy is.
A lot of hard thinking about philosophy can cause, big transformations in your character, your outlook on life, your whole framework.
I think of philosophy as really just one part of the whole intellectual enterprise, one part of trying to understand who we are, why we're here, what the world we live in is like.
They're questions which define us as human beings, which we cannot and we ought not stop asking and pondering.
I think we can each deal with these questions ourselves to a surprising extent. Questions about goodness and evil, questions about meaning, questions about the nature of work, the nature of fulfillment, what it takes to feel satisfied in what we're doing. All the great philosophical questions are such that we can grapple with them ourselves.
It's not that you always have to be questioning everything, but everything is always a candidate for being subject to, rational scrutiny and criticism.
Stanford University professor Ken Taylor thinks rational scrutiny and criticism are tools we should all be using every day. That's why Taylor and his colleague John Perry created a weekly radio show they call Philosophy Talk.
This is KALW San Francisco. Next, it's Philosophy Talk. Today's topic, do you want to live forever?
Today, Taylor and Perry are gearing up for the latest episode of their show. Just what are they hoping to achieve here? And what does philosophy have to do with it?
Well, what does philosophy have to do with it? Well, we're trying to get to the bottom of things. We take the question wherever it goes, and we're asking sort of fundamental questions.
And remember, we're going live at 12.
Right.
The time is noon.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. You're listening to Philosophy Talk, a program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. This week, would you want to live forever?
Well, this seems to be an easy question. I mean, there's a pretty simple argument you can give. I mean, first part, dying is a bad thing, right? You agree about that, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, for most cases,
yeah,
unless you're in terrible pain or something.
Right. So here's my argument. Life is a good thing. More of a good thing is better than less of a good thing. So wouldn't you want more life?
First of all, we're not asking whether on any given day you're going to choose to die the next day, even though you're in good health and everything. We're talking about right now, looking at it dispassionately. You say, would it be good for me to live forever or not?
Today's topic, would you want to live forever? We picked that because I think it's an interesting question. And I also think it's a kind of backward way of asking, well, what's the meaning of human life? What is a human life for? Because if you ask the question, well, would you want to live forever? You have to answer that question, you have to think, well, what is a life?
The question, why are we here, has been the thread, I think, linking so many of the great philosophers. Meaning and purpose. We're always searching for purpose. We're searching for meaning.
That search took a big step forward thousands of years ago in the courtyards and colonnades, marketplaces and law courts of ancient Greece. Over centuries, the Greeks developed a sophisticated culture. As their society neared its golden age in the 5th century BC, the widespread use of slave labor gave Greek citizens unprecedented time to think about the world and their place in it. A few began to long for some sort of wisdom that would help them understand who they were, why they were here, and how they should live. And no one longed for this wisdom more than a Greek scholar named Pythagoras.
It was Pythagoras who lived before Plato and Socrates in ancient Greece. As far as we know, he coined the term philosophy, which means a love of wisdom.
And think about this for a second. An object of love, when you have it, you embrace it. When you lack it, you pursue it. Philosophy is just supposed to be the pursuit and embracing of wisdom about living.
The aim of the school of Pythagoras was not just to understand things intellectually, but to transformed human beings. And that means try to understand and become aware of your deepest self. It's your primary aim, is to give your attention, give your awareness to what you are, not just on the surface, but deep down. Until we can get in touch with that and open to that and let it breathe in our life will be meaningless. And that's terrifying, but interesting truth.
His search for deeper awareness and truth would take Pythagoras to a surprising place, out of our chaotic and impermanent world and into the eternal world of numbers. Pythagoras believed that the laws that govern numbers also govern us and our universe. He and his followers began to search for those laws within every aspect of our existence. They became the first to recognize the mathematical nature of music, to come up with the concepts of squared and cubed numbers, and to demonstrate geometric theorems that are still in use today. Their spiritual quest had led them to a whole new way of looking at the world, and given birth not just to philosophy, but to what we call today science.
People say philosophy is the queen of the sciences. You know, it gives birth to the sciences, and there's some truth to that.
The natural sciences have their roots in philosophy. In fact, there was a time where there was no distinction between philosophy and science. They were the people trying to figure out the world, the natural world. How does it work? What's it made of? You know, where are we is a fundamental question to understanding who we are and what we should do.
For the next 2,000 years, Pythagoras and his mix of science and spirituality, and his vision of a perfect reality we can only grasp with our minds, would fascinate philosophers. But in the next century, another Greek thinker would show that philosophy is relevant in the everyday world too. His name was Socrates.
Cicero once said Socrates was the first man to bring philosophy into the marketplace. Prior to the time of Socrates, most philosophy was speculation about the cosmos. It was the big scale, astronomy, the nature of the universe, how many elements are there composing everything in the world. Socrates wanted to ask questions about what it is to be a good person, what it is to live a meaningful life.
To Socrates, an unexamined life wasn't worth living. God orders me to fulfill the philosopher's mission of searching into myself and other men, he told his fellow Athenians. Then he tried to convince them that the first step on this path to knowledge is admitting how little we actually know.
The beginning of wisdom is the awareness of ignorance. And his aim was to make people aware that they were ignorant. And then the wish to understand would grow. And then we could start communicating and searching together for something positive.
Socrates was like a kid in asking questions and not being willing to just take the answer and stop. He wanted to ask a follow-up question and another question, just like kids do with their parents, you know, the why that gets repeated.
But when Socrates dared to raise questions about who should govern the city, the men in charge in Athens ordered him to stop. When Socrates refused to put an end to his controversial questions, the city fathers decided to put an end to Socrates. They accused him of breaking a law forbidding blasphemy, a capital crime in Athens, and of corrupting the young with his disruptive ideas. A court found him guilty and sentenced him to death. He was given the chance to flee the city and save his life, but Socrates said no. To the men on his jury, he said, "If you say to me, 'Socrates, this time we will let you off, but upon one condition, that you are not to inquire or speculate this way any more,' I should say to you, 'Men of Athens, I love and honor you, but while I have life and strength, I shall never cease from the practice and teaching of philosophy. I shall never alter my ways, not even if I have to die many times.'" To Socrates, running away wasn't just cowardly. It was wrong.
We've come to think of ethics as being all about staying out of trouble. We've come to think of ethics as about rules and laws. The ancient thinkers thought much more deeply. The great philosophers of the past thought of ethics not as being about staying out of trouble. Ethics was about creating strength. The ancients didn't want us to live with less than excellence day to day. So they didn't want us to ever live with less than ethical decision-making day to day. Socrates was willing to go to his death to obey a law that could have even been an unjust law. And yet he believed if he had benefited from the law his entire life, he shouldn't desert the law the one time it was inconvenient for him.
When Socrates calmly drank the poison the city of Athens provided, his death became a defining moment in the history of the Western world. And in the life of Plato, Greece's next great philosopher.
Plato was a great pupil of Socrates. The energy, the force of Socrates' presence on Plato's life enabled somehow his mind to light up like a cosmos. He was shaken and awakened by this great man who was unjustly executed. He devoted his life to interpreting Socrates' message and recording in tremendous artistic form the dialogues of Socrates.
How can a man know if his actions are just or unjust?
Is the just thing to always do right?
But who is to say what is right and what is wrong?
Socratic dialogue, Socratic question. Well, all Socratic dialogue was questioning another person so that you could together arrive at the truth about an issue. What is justice? What is piety? What is goodness? What is knowledge?
How can we know what is just or unjust when all this discussion has taught me is what I do not know?
The great thing is they often don't come up with a decisive answer. It's the process itself that we should learn from.
To clarify our need for the philosophical process and demonstrate its value, Plato came up with a powerful allegory comparing human existence to being trapped in a dark cave.
Plato used this wonderful analogy. He said, we're all like people chained in a cave, staring at the wall, watching shadows dance across the walls and mistaking those shadows as realities. Plato said the true philosopher is the one amongst us who can break his chains, go out from the cave, and see the light of the real sun. But then the philosopher has a job to do. He should return back into the cave, explain to his fellows what the real truth is, and lead them into the light. Plato's use of his own analogy of the cave was to try to goad us into joining him in the belief that behind the physical universe in which we live, there are much greater realities.
Plato had convinced himself of the existence of an alternate universe that seemed imaginary to others, but which he considered more real than the world we see around us. It was in this ideal world, not our own, that the greater truths philosophers longed for could be found. Plato's powerful vision would mold philosophy, for better and worse, for the next 2,000 years.
Plato basically bullied people away from the kind of investigations in the physical world that later natural science was to engage in. One of his star students was not about to be bullied, and that was, of course, Aristotle. Aristotle believed that this world is not at all a cave, but is the playing ground on which we live out our lives and is deserving of the greatest scrutiny. Not something to be escaped, but something to be observed, something to be understood, something to be lived.
Aristotle was a much more sort of concrete, realistic philosopher than Plato, and that was one of their big differences. So he had a philosophy about the nature of mind, he had a philosophy about the nature of physical reality, he had a philosophy about the heavens and why they are the way they are. He had a philosophy about knowledge. He invented logic. He was the first to sort of articulate the principles of logic, and he did it in such a way that nobody had anything to add, really, to his logic until nearly the beginning of the 20th century.
Today, philosophers continue to ask the kinds of questions first posed by Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Questions about the meaning and purpose of life. Questions like, Would you want to live forever?
But what are we trying to get at when we ask this question? I think we're trying to get at, what is a human life for? Does it have a kind of natural ending point? When is it exhausted? When are its possibilities exhausted?
Is it an important aspect of the worth of a human life and what we like about it that it's finite?
I mean, I think life would just be pleasant. It'd just be pleasure, and you could enjoy things for a very, very long time. We have a caller in the line, John from San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, John.
Thank you very much. I'd like to make a suggestion that perhaps life is not a good, and so that the extinction of it would be a bad.
Ooh.
Maybe it's just a neutral thing. Maybe it's something like, an example would be maybe a hammer, which could build a house or it could kill a person. And the hammer itself is just a neutral thing. It's how it's used that makes it good and bad.
The caller has raised a question at the center of some of philosophy's most heated debates. How do we define right and wrong, good and bad? Throughout its long history, philosophy has always had one powerful ally and rival in these debates: religion.
Philosophy and religion have always sort of been very closely connected. And I would characterize the relationship as love-hate.
When people search the great religious traditions for answers, they can find great commonality with what the best philosophers have said, because some of the best religious thinkers throughout the centuries were great philosophers in their own right. They searched for answers from revelation or inspiration, as well as from reason.
Now, the problem for theologians then, if they take reason as sort of ultimate, then what's the role for God or revelation, right? They're in danger of just becoming philosophers and not theologians anymore. But I think the main difference is the commitment to reason, rational reflection, critical argument as the ultimate standard for deciding what the doctrine should be.
In philosophy, everything is always, to some extent, up for grabs. In religion, ultimately, it gets down to, well, you have to accept that on faith. The question stops.
In the Middle Ages, much of the questioning stopped as philosophy and religion seemed to become one. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas raised the words of the ancient philosophers to the level of divine truths, second only to the Bible itself. New philosophical inquiries seemed suspicious, even blasphemous.
The problem came when philosophy became the handmaiden of theology rather than the queen of the sciences, which it was with Plato and Aristotle.
But in the centuries after the Renaissance, some Europeans began to feel that neither the answers offered by religion nor those put forward by Plato, Aristotle, and their followers were enough. Their search for their own answers to life's questions would give birth to the modern era of philosophy.
The greatness and the power and the transformational quality of modern philosophy is that it invites the mind to become independent of belief systems and to think for itself, to look for itself. And in this, it corresponds to the great humanistic upsurge of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. This was this movement that said, I don't wish to believe without understanding. I wish to know for myself. I don't wish to believe something just because someone else says it. I want to know for myself. Even if what I know is small, it's I who know it.
One of those most determined to think for himself and to question every theory or system that had come before was a French writer and thinker named René Descartes.
Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, began his enterprise with doubt. Doubting everything he'd been told by his parents, everything he'd been told by his teachers, everything that he had come to believe through his senses, everything that he would assent to because of his memory. He finally got down to one proposition: I'm thinking. And he said, wait, if I try to doubt that, in the very process of doubting, I am thinking. So it's impossible that that be wrong. I think, therefore I am, from which he spun his whole philosophy.
In the centuries since Descartes, thousands of philosophers have used the freedom he championed to spin philosophies of their own. and come to thousands of different conclusions about the meaning of life and our place in this world.
Philosophy is much more an activity than a doctrine, partly because philosophers disagree hotly about a lot of things. I doubt that philosophy is going to converge on one single true theory in answer to any of these questions.
You are such a grouch. Well, think of it this way. I could just take pleasure
But even when philosophers disagree about the answers, they continue to insist that the questions are worth asking. To those who love it, philosophy is as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago, and still has valuable lessons to teach.
In my own case, I think I'm a much less confused and happier human being for having thought so long and so hard about philosophy.
Got one last call. James.
Hello?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people lack imagination. Immortality would be a fantastic thing. You could master all kinds of art forms. You could work on all kinds. You could solve the political problems of poverty. I mean, there's no end to it.
I agree with you, James. Go.
Philosophy shakes people up. Nietzsche once said a philosopher is an explosive in the presence of which everything is in danger. Keats once said philosophy will clip an angel's wings. People don't like to ask questions often. They don't like doubts to be aired.
It's easy to forget answers to questions, but it's a little hard to forget the questions when they're really good ones.
Don Perry, have you learned anything? Are you ready to live forever now? I'm going to give you eternal life.
I've learned something. I'm going to go for an extra 15 years over what I was planning before we started the show. That's just to show I'm open and objective and so forth.
Yeah, I think life is so intrinsically good that if you could live a good human life and you were always given another day, you'd always take it, and so you'd end up living forever.
Socrates once said, I don't have all the answers, but if I can help you ask all the right questions, you can make some progress. And that's what the great philosophers help us to do. I see people beginning to ask those questions. And so I think that will signal a renaissance of philosophy. Because when the questions begin to be asked widely enough, the philosophers step up to the plate and take a swing and try to give some answers.
The questions of philosophy are questions from deep in the heart of the spirit of man. Philosophy represents an impulse deep within our nature to search, to try to be related to something much greater than ourselves. This is why we need philosophy, to be brought to this sense of wonder and awe and connection to ourselves and to the universe. So this is an awesome aspect of the human being, which is as awesome as the stars and skies above.